And once again, we're on our show, our every other week show. Again, we have Crystal Clark, who is going to give us a presentation on social engineering. The 4 or 5 categories, maybe we'll add another one. She's very well prepared for this, and I'd like to introduce her at this moment. Crystal, are you ready to present?
I'm ready. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about social engineering, technopathy, predictive programming, behavioral cycles, and transhumanism. Now, technopathy is a word that I prefer to use in no way what I'm referring to. When I use the term, I'm talking about the psychopathic use of technology.
Crystal's cutting in and out for some reason.
Yes. Crystal, can you hear us? Well, for some reason, Crystal is having problems with her computer or her internet connection. We will continue her presentation as soon as she can come back on. I will try to fill in for her. The use of social engineering, as we see it today, began towards the end of the Civil War. Reconstruction was the first example of progressed social engineering using the South as an environment for experimentation on how to control one area of the country from a very small unit of collective banking.
I would like to say something first about boys up in the Fusion Center. Why don't you grow up and listen to what we have to say? How about giving my connection back to Crystal Clark? Otherwise, there's a consequence for that, boys. Okay?
Crystal?
She's not back yet. There she is.
All right, I don't know what happened there.
The boys in the Fusion Center got upset.
And we aren't even done yet.
They're afraid of you, Crystal.
Well, I hope they learn something while they're listening. So anyway, getting back to predictive programming, I was told years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago now, by somebody who actually has kind of a high station, I guess we could say, who works amongst social engineers. They said to me that bad guys always tell you what they're going to do. And I think that predictive programming is really what that is. Of course, they don't hold press conferences and say, we're going to enslave you all with technology and we're going to eliminate, 90% of you. They don't do that. But if you watch closely what they precede into the collective in various ways, especially through media, it's kind of like the psychological version of the boiling frog. So where they intend to go with the future and the control that they have over it currently, you find in their books, their television shows, their movies, their print media, and it really is a way to prepare and acclimate the individual for what's coming before it comes, so it doesn't shock people, and they don't really think twice about it, so that's important. Behavioral cycles, what we need to begin to look at is whether or not behavioral cycles are honest internal evolutionary processes, or are they external, predetermined, and engineered outcomes. And then transhumanism is the idea that normal sentient human abilities, behavior, and consequent natural evolution are significantly flawed and require technological augmentation for us to reach our full potentials. Social engineering is a term that I actually picked up from you, James, and I really like it. I have no idea how our modern dictionaries would define that term, nor am I apt to go and look and take it at face value. So I would like for you to offer your opinion about what you think that means.
When the advertising industry began in America, selling consumer products and vilifying competition, I remember that one of the fish canneries had on its commercial, only white tuna. Well, anyone that's familiar with tuna knows that the best tuna is called albacore, and it is pink. So this was a advertising ploy to pull people over to think that the best tuna was the white tuna. And that is where we officially started in the advertising industry, forming people's opinions for them. That's one of the first starts. Now, it already started in other things, mainly once that you have campaigns, electoral campaigns, you're going to try to put your candidate in the best possible light and his opponent in the worst. So this is opinion forming. Now, social engineers have adopted opinion forming into an extension which goes beyond merely trying to shade the truth or to give someone a better light or give someone a worse light. It goes into repetition, it goes into trance, it goes into post-hypnotic suggestion, it even goes into mind control. And that's what we have today. And what Crystal has got for you today is how the instruments that are basically mind control operate, and how there's a hard sell on now to convince us that we're just not good enough to survive unless we're altered, which is the ultimate mind-bending hard sell on a bunch of crap. Pardon the expression. Crystal?
Would you agree that opinion forming ultimately amounts to behavioral modification?
Yes, I would. Of course, that wasn't what it looked like when it got started. But, of course, after you sit through several soap operas and your mind is increasingly turning more mush-like, you're quite capable of being sold a product that you have no use for, and it might be of inferior quality to something you pass up just because you saw a commercial.
And so the opinion forming and behavioral modification, would you say, is based on the social engineers having a predetermined outcome, and they're trying to find consensus and build it and buy it in a way the individual thinks that they chose it for themselves?
Yes, I would say that first of all, they get a template. They have experimented enough through the media to find out what works. They poll the results, and if their bottom line improves, then they know they're on the right track. Ad agencies were expert at this as early on as 1952, 1953.
All right, so because technopathy and predictive programming go together in our particular moment in time in our civilization, because they're using those technologies to do it, I thought it might help to cover examples of predictive programming first. Of course, again, this comes through Hollywood, their movies, TV advertising, music, and all forms of print media. So as an example, and I don't know how many people know this, and I do have the image saved, but before the Boston Marathon bombing happened, you know, the media showed that image over and over again of the fellow in the wheelchair who had what appeared to be the flesh blown off of his legs down to the bone from the knees down, which, of course, he turned out to be an actor. Before this happened, Nike had an advertisement, a print advertisement, which was the exact same thing. It was a leg from the knee down with most of the flesh having been, looked like it was torn or blown off. From halfway down, really only the bone left inserted into the shoe. This is an example of predictive programming. So once that went out, which should have really raised an eyebrow, I mean, how bizarre is that, right? I don't know, maybe because of the constant promotion of the zombie apocalypse, people didn't think twice about it, but you have to admit it's really, really bizarre to have a shoe manufacturer put out a poster with a leg where the flesh is torn off wearing their shoe.
Yes, they're laying it into the subconscious, so when it hits the conscious experience, it has more impact, but it's subtle, and it affects us at the behavioral level of our thinking, and it's kind of like a subconscious implant.
That's right. They are preceding these ideas into the collective in a very subtle way so that when the actual event happens, people are prepared for it. There was a movie, it's an old film called Soylent Green. What's kind of interesting about that, it's based from really Agenda 21 and the overpopulation club. Like, you eat too much meat, and the vegetarians are out in full force. If you want to be a vegetarian, great. But you can't force other people to do it. And it's interesting that Bill Gates has recently funded a project that will create artificial meat substitutes. So that's very interesting. And this is what I'm explaining, is this is what they have planned for your future. If you watch what the social engineers are doing, what they're saying, what they're writing about, and what they're investing in, this is what they have planned for your future. The Matrix was a very interesting series all the way around, but I think very telling is how they were feeding the dead back to the living. And of course we have aborted fetal cells as a flavor enhancer in Pepsi. So, that's really sickening. And when Obama was asked about this, he said, well, this is just a standard business practice. I don't know how we came to a place where putting aborted fetal cells in our soft drinks became a standard business practice. I'm still trying to wrap my brain around that one. Yeah, it's pretty sick. Yeah. Right?
Yes, yeah. It definitely is. Very, very sick. And, we saw a spoof, Crystal and I both saw a spoof in which these men went out, pretended to be the WTO, and people that would go to their site would mistake them for the World Trade Organization, and they would invite them to speak at whatever. And so one of the first presentations they gave was representative of McDonald's, and they hypothesized, of course, presenting it as a sort of think tank study of what we might do in third world countries where people are so hungry and they can't afford our product. We'll give them reworked refuge, make a meat product, and that way it'll cut costs and will also recycle waste. And of course, these kids, it was in front of college students, and the kids started throwing things at them. I was overjoyed by that, and so were they. So were these young men who were spoofing. Would you like to tell people what that movie was? So they might be interested in seeing it.
I didn't write it down. I don't remember the name of it.
The Yes Men.
The Yes Men, that's right.
Yes.
That's right. Yes. And you can find their videos on YouTube. They're really very, very clever and really very ballsy, if you want the truth, because they went all the way with a lot of this stuff. And the absurdity of the way people reacted should shock people. And it's a very good lesson on how people have been socially conditioned, socially engineered to believe anything a person in an expensive suit says.
Except for those college kids. They didn't fall for it.
Well, that's good. Maybe they're actually learning something these days.
I think that they just hadn't been around the opinion-forming media long enough to have their mind taken over by it. And they still had this sense of honor and respect that so many people today, they think that if you're under 35, you just have been honed into being a mind control robot by the educational system. Well, these kids don't take that educational system that seriously. I mean, look at your son. He's a brilliant boy, and he's above it, isn't he?
He's trying his hardest.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the kids nowadays realize it's an indoctrination system. It's not an education system, so that's important. But of course, there's also 1984, or We, which you have explained that 1984 was plagiarized from the book. I think you said it was Russian, called We.
Yevgeny Zamyatin.
All right. And of course, the 24-hour surveillance of our actions, both public and private. Equilibrium. Now, a lot of these films that I'm going to bring up are on Netflix. I think it's $7, $8 a month to subscribe to Netflix, and all these movies are on there for free. This one is called Equilibrium, and it's got Christian Bale in it. And it was really, really very, very interesting because once the government had found a way to lock people into the state way of thinking, anything that went beyond that was banned, including books and paintings, anything from the past. And also, it was the mass drugging of the populace to stifle their emotions. Emotions were viewed as a very bad thing. Of course, we have fluoride on our water, but what was interesting about the drug that they were taking, it started with a P, and it had a very interesting name, which was clearly an inference to drugs like Prozac.
Yes. In fact, it could have been.
Yeah, the drug wasn't Prozac, but it was obvious that that was what they were referring to in the film. It's an excellent film. I highly recommend it. There's a series on Netflix, I think it's like 13 episodes, and it's called Strangers. And this one is exceptionally interesting because it is really an inside window into the psyche of the social engineers, because they really believe that as useless eaters and mindless sheep, we don't really have free will, that we're so easily manipulated, and that we're body machines, and that if you know what button to push or what stimuli to subject us to, they'll get the right response. So that's really good. There's a film called Cypher, C-Y-P-H-E-R, on Netflix that is excellent, and I'll let that one be a surprise. It's got Lucy Liu in it. It's very good. There's a series on Netflix called Continuum, and what's interesting about this is that kind of the theme of this film is that the battle for the future will be fought in the past, which is very interesting given the show we did about Napoleon and the pyramid and the microchipping. So time travel is involved in this, people going back to the past. But what's really interesting about this particular series is that it's completely filled with the false choice dichotomy. It exploits cognitive dissonance relentlessly. And basically what happened is, in the future, everything is run by a corporate Congress, which is exactly what the Trans-Pacific Partnership is trying to create here now in our own reality at this very moment. And what's so interesting about this film is there are convicts who get sent back, but one of their police officers also gets sent back. And of course, she's on the side of the establishment, which is really very interesting. And the other people that got sent back are trying to prevent corporations from taking over in the future. And in this series, they're projected as the bad guys. And what's interesting about that is that when I say false choice, dichotomy, and narrative, of course, the only, good person is the police officer upholding the way things have turned out. And the other people that are working to prevent that kind of a future are constantly shown as only dealing with it violently, right? So the only way that people, I don't know if you want to call them eco-terrorists or corporate terrorists. Yeah, they're terrorists because, they only deal with it violently. So those are your two false choices, and neither of them are accurate, which is very interesting.
That's right.
In print media, the chemtrails and the geoengineering, the chemtrails began appearing in films that my son was watching nearly 11 years ago. And then we see more and more, and this is really very important, if you watch the advertising, especially the advertising, you can see which direction they're trying to socially engineer public opinion and thoughts. You can see which direction they're trying to move people. And you'll see more and more magazine ads of new cars, car ads with completely chemtrailed skies. And this went on for a while. Of course, the IPCC, which is a New World Order sponsored, UN sponsored product, just came out with their climate report and how it's absolutely human beings causing climate change. And so, of course, I think it was the New Scientist immediately after that produced an article that said, well, we need geoengineering to combat climate change. And of course, what they aren't telling people is that geoengineering is the reason for climate change. And that's what's really going on.
More than any other.
That's right.
More than any other. Now, that's not to say that the industrial use that is misapplied across the board, and Fukushima is a sterling example of that, doesn't contribute. Of course, Fukushima is contributing to despoil the Pacific Ocean of being a food basket for the world. As bad as the Gulf of Mexico is and was, they found something even worse, haven't they?
They did, and they will continue to do so, because destroying the food baskets of the world over is part of their agenda. It fits.
And the oxygen production.
And the oxygen production, that's right. A lot of people don't know, but most of our oxygen comes from the ocean, not trees.
30% of the oxygen of the Earth is produced in the Pacific Ocean. 20% is produced in the Atlantic Ocean. 15 to 20% is produced by the Amazon basin that is being deforested. So add up the figures, people. Add up the figures.
Yeah. So really at this point, whether you want to believe that it's purposeful depopulation or if it's accidental and ignorant depopulation is the end result either way, and that's really important for people to address. Now, lastly, I saved rollerball because this is an example that you've used before, and so I would like you to go into that because it was really so very, very telling early on.
Rollerball was futurist in many ways. In fact, people were paying attention to it at the time for the actors and for the drama and so forth. But there were so many things in it that were compelling and farsighted enough to be mentioned today. Now, I'm talking about the original Rollerball. There was a subsequent one made. I haven't even seen that one, nor do I intend to. But in the original, you had a number of things that were brought up. We had gone past the corporate takeover of the world. They had had a corporate war. People that were elderly were removed. And the hero, who is a champion rollerball player, has the money and the ability to hide his parents. And when he's introducing a young lady that he is involved with to his home, he pushes a little button, the wall comes back, and there's his parents. Things like that. He wants to find out because they're rewriting history. And there's no history that he can find on the corporate wars. And this is what he wants to know something about, because he wants to know why these corporate people have so much power, arbitrary, tyrannical power, that they can take his wife. They took his former wife, just took her. So, of course, he wants to know how this came about. They have no libraries. They have no books. Everything's supposed to be on computer. Of course, they won't admit that they have destroyed history or that they've destroyed books. They've put them all on computers, right? Or on the computer.
Yeah.
Mindful of Mr. Computer in Utah, right?
Right.
So he goes to the computer. And the guy running the computer is Sir John Gielgud, who is old and absent-minded and puttering around. And he says, everything you can get me on the corporate wars. And so the old fella does his best, but he doesn't know how to work this computer. And he's the only one that has access to it. I think it's tremendous. I think the movie had so many things. It has a scene in which a young lady runs out into the night at a big party with a laser burst weapon, a gun, handheld gun. And she shoots at the trees in the distance and sets them on fire. They had, at that time when this movie was made, they had that weapon. So there was so many things in there. And, of course, if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to give a spoiler. I'm not going to tell you about it, but it is well worth seeing.
Who are the actors, James, in the original, so that people know if they're watching the right one?
I'm trying to think of his name. Everybody knows him. He's still alive, and you see him in things every once in a while. Is it, Khan? I want to say Khan. I'm very bad on names. They just don't matter to me.
I'm really bad too with names. Was this in the 70s, do you think?
Yes.
Okay, so definitely not be produced in the 90s or 2000.
No, any remake of it wouldn't be any damn good. I found that over and over again. Anytime that they remake these, they betray them. It's kind of like the way Orwell betrayed Yevgeny Zamyatin's book, because Orwell was a social engineer. You know, when he followed up with 1984, what did he do? He wrote Animal Farm and indicated that, well, this is just what happens. We're all like this. We'd all do the same thing. That's a lie. We are not all pigs. We're not all after the power of life and death over others. No, we're not. But this kind of social evolutionism.
Well, it's de-evolutionism, yeah.
Yes, it is. It is, because it ends in destruction.
We would do anything to save ourselves. Our individual selves, yeah.
Yeah. Everything that is important, significant, or has any kind of truth, any kind of revelation in it of 1984 was stolen from Yevgeny Zamyatin, including Newspeak.
That's really interesting, because this is something that even today I don't think a lot of people really understand, which we'll get into more as we go on. There was an excellent book that I got a few years ago called What Orwell Didn't Know. And what was so excellent about this book is they began to explain that you know that you're beginning to live in a dictatorship when they begin to change the language, because when it's not honest language, they don't have honest intentions.
And we see that with Wikipedia. We see that with the newest collegiate dictionaries. They remove words and replace them with a more technophobic word that
or redefine them and rebrand them.
Yes. Like one of the things that Dmitry Kulesov talks about is how since 9/11 Ground zero doesn't mean the same thing.
That's right. And it used to mean the spot directly, was it above or below a nuclear detonation?
The point at which, whether it was above ground, if it was a subground burst, or if it was in a tower, it's the point on Earth closest to where the explosion or detonation takes place. That's ground zero. Ground zero.
And for people not familiar with Dmitry Kulesov, you can find his video on YouTube. You can friend him on Facebook. You know, what he has to say is really interesting, and how far he went to prove how many dictionaries they have changed. They've changed especially the online dictionaries that came on CD. You know, you could go into like a Best Buy and buy a dictionary on CD-ROM. They've changed those. They've went and backdated these to make it look like this was always the definition. They've put an awful lot of effort into it.
This is an important part of social engineering. What you're referring to as far as rebranding, it is exactly the underpinnings of rebranding. If you don't have the words to express a thought richly, it's probably because you have been using one of these recent dictionaries. I used to joke about people, you know, whenever there'd be an article that someone would write and there'd be a complaint that uses these compound, complex sentences or uses words I don't understand, I would usually, in a very sinister undertone, say, well, you could wait for the Reader's Digest version, couldn't you? Well, I don't mean to criticize Reader's Digest because they get a lot of good information out, or did. I don't even know if they still publish them. But people could get a fairly decent overview, not as technical as the original article, but they could get an idea. They felt like they were keeping up with things, and they did. Reader's Digest did try to improve your vocabulary.
But of course, all of these things are a testament to how far they have gone and will continue to go to dumb people down.
Oh, there's no limit. If you think that potlatch was a mechanism that ancient people used or tribal people used or people that used a very primitive form of economy, then you have another thing coming. The potlatch has been what has held this society together in the form of the military-industrial complex, because this society is based on spending, and spending has become a way of destroying value. Now, if you'll stop and think about it, you'll see what's been going on since NAFTA and GATT is, if you put it in the context of potlatch, you understand that if you can keep the surplus in your hands and deny it to anyone else, like you make a law that people can't catch rainwater, or you make a law that people can't store food, or you make a law that people can't keep their seed for the next planting. You make these laws, what you're doing is you're creating potlatch. At the end of the season, all the surplus is in the hands of these monsters.
That's right, and we've done a couple of shows now on the Trans-Pacific Partnership and how this global corporate conglomerate will become a monopoly, and one of the benefits to being a monopoly is not just controlling people with lack, but also price fixing. If you wouldn't mind explaining the definition of potlatch, I think it would be helpful. It's not a word that people hear very often these days, and I think that a lot of people may confuse it with, you know, the dish they take to their Sunday dinner. What is potlatch, just so that people know what you mean?
Originally, it was a good idea. Originally, it was intended to keep anyone from getting hold of the surplus and becoming more powerful than anybody else. So at the end of the season, they'd take everything, the furs, everything that people weren't going to use, have immediate use for, and they'd burn it. And this
so it prevented hoarding.
It prevented hoarding. That was a point of it. But today, what it is for creating a mechanism to determine the value of anything and to prevent the people themselves from doing so. So they can't keep enough food to make it through. They're totally subject to the market. They're going to be immediately impacted by changes in prices. They're under the thumb of the consumer industry. The consumer industry should be under the thumb of the consumer, but they have reversed it, and they have reversed it with reverse potlatch.
And of course, as we explained, in regards to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this is about making people completely dependent on the system that will become what we refer to as the New World Order if it's enabled through our actions or inactions to fully express and manifest itself, which is why part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement is you are not allowed to buy local.
Yes, yes. And, you know, one of the other aspects of it, and this is the most insidious part of it, is to control all natural resources, to gain control of them. And the next step, you see that this might be the mentality behind creating Fukushima, creating the Gulf of Mexico debacle, using this Corexit right now off Australia at the Great Barrier Reef. This might be you get control of water, or water resources. The next thing you do is you contaminate whatever water resource you don't have control over. And then you raise the value of what you have tremendously. You put people in desperate straits. Well, when you look at it that way, when you look at, well, why do they let this happen? You know, maybe they even create it. But why does it continue to go on and on and on? And then they add Corexit on top of it. And then at Fukushima, they have done nothing to contain those reactors like they did at Chernobyl. And even at Chernobyl, it's still contaminated Northern Europe. There are countries today that cannot use their own produce. So who do they have to depend on? They have to depend on international markets for their produce. So you see there's an insidious side to all of this. They're opportunizing these things. At what point do they create them? It's like war. At what point do they create war in order to enrich themselves?
That's right. They're opportunizing misery, death, and lack.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
All right. So technopathy is an instrument of control that we're going to talk a lot more about, and it's interesting because there are a couple of shows you and I did earlier this year where we got a little bit into this here and there, and even though we didn't go into it in the depth that we are tonight, we said more in those shows than Snowden has revealed yet. And I think that's important because I understand that everybody needs to hear it from a certain kind of source. And for people that can only process information that still comes from the mainstream media, Snowden did us all a tremendous favor by putting it into the collective mind that this is happening. But he didn't go far enough, I don't think, in explaining to people why it's so important and where it goes, or what you refer to as the principle of inevitability. This is something he's not really done, which I would like to think that someday he will, for people who still need to hear it from a mainstream source, because the clock really is ticking, and of course that's why our show is called Race with Time. When it comes to predictive programming, there is something that I would like to stress, because not everybody who comes out with something that ends up happening was part of the social engineering process. There are a couple of different things going on. There are those in the know, which are the social engineers who put it out there on purpose. But again, going back to your principle of inevitability, there are also people who understand where this goes by projecting it to its outcome and can therefore predetermine what steps will be taken next. And it's important that we don't get the two confused and don't accuse people of having foreknowledge of an event as though they are insiders, because that isn't always the case, and that's always important for me to stress.
I think, like about Fukushima, we have people that see very clearly that however use is being put to it, however it's being opportunized, whatever could be behind it doing this is short-sighted madness, because the threat is very real and inevitable that they have gone past the point of return. They have created a situation that is out of their control and cannot be corrected by any leap of technology they're capable of, will be capable of now or in the future. So, it is like they have thrown the baby out with the bathwater to the 10th degree.
And they aren't done yet.
No, they're not done yet. The idea of weaponizing a reactor is something they've written about. It is something that they've talked about. They talk about bombing countries that have reactors to knock out their reactor. Now, they've done this before.
And we know that these were not designed for MOX fuel. And there's also the virus that we know Israeli and American programmers are responsible for, Stuxnet.
Yes, the possibility that this was intentional, that it was done in a coordinated effort to punish Japan for whatever, or to create a situation that would serve them for some other reason. That's a possibility. I mean, you can step back and you can look at this from all sorts of different directions, but the lies that were told about the magnitude of the earthquake, it was not a 9-point earthquake. That's evident in when you watch some of the television stations' videos at the time that it happened, and you see that the people aren't being hit against the wall. The walls aren't crumbling down. There are tall buildings still standing, and a 9-point bring everything down. So it wasn't a 9-point. What was it that created the tsunami? If it wasn't a 9-point earthquake, only seismologists know. Here's another situation where we have scientists that know exactly what happened, that are not coming forward, are dead, but we have seismologists all over the world that can tell us what happened there, and they're not. I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't a number of them dead. Now, just like the microbiologists that have been killed because they knew what was under their microscope. They can't practice compartmentalization on a good technician that is a scientist. Because if he's a microbiologist, he's performing this work, he's got his own overview. He knows what's under his microscope.
That's true, and at this point, I think more and more people are recognizing that the lies that we've been told are innumerable at this point. And there are some who believe that this type of technology, that nuclear radiation on these plants, very much like the Twin Towers, were developed so that they could be destroyed, because that was part of the plan. And again, if you look at social engineering and predictive programming, so many of the events, especially in the last few years, were predicted in the Illuminati playing cards, including the Twin Towers. There were so many people who knew that those towers were going to come down, and there are people who believe that that's what they were built for, that that was the entire purpose behind building those towers, and that our nuclear power stations are very similar. Of course, I can't prove that. I don't know if you can prove that, but at the end of the day, what we do know is that if this mentality continues, nobody will survive it, so we have to stop it. That's what's super important.
Well, we know they like to advertise or telegraph what they're going to do before they do it, because they get off on laughing in their beard at us.
Yeah, it's just like the Batman movie came out and people that zoomed in saw that Sandy Hook was on the map in the film before Sandy Hook happened.
There are so many occasions of this. I won't call them coincidences, because I don't believe when we're talking about things of this magnitude that coincidence plays any part in it. I really don't.
I don't believe in coincidence either myself, no.
Well, I went over to Dallas the day after Kennedy was killed, and I saw them cut down the tree that was standing out in front of the school book depository that would have prevented anyone from that window being able to hit anyone in that limousine. And today, I hear these people who are self-professed experts. They have good ideas, they have information, but they haven't done a thorough enough research to know that, because they never mention it. And it is things like this and some of the things that I've mentioned that if you know them and you add them to your thesis, if you add them to your material, you open people's eyes up. Are they trying not to? Well, I'll say enough to get my book bought.
Yeah, that's really very important, because, again, what we're talking about is the rewriting of history, which ends up amounting to the rewriting of reality in the mind of the individual, because they don't have the other information.
Well, I was watching here recently, Jesse Ventura and Piers Morgan had another little of their meetings, one a mind and one sore. And, of course, Piers Morgan, I think it was Lee Harvey Oswald that did it and all this crap. And here we have Jesse Ventura, who's dealing with enough information to refute that. But if he had had some of the key information that is mentioned in the Warren Report, but avoided in the main consensus of what's there, because these people that want to write about it don't read the damn thing. They don't read enough to have the follow-ups. But, I've talked about several things that slam it together that should be common knowledge, but are hidden. They're there. They're there for people, for a real researcher. But the thing is, I'm not finding people in ufology or in the JFK assassination, researchers that should be worth their salt that are not, because they can't make the connections. What's wrong? I don't know. I don't know whether they are just afraid or whether or not they want to save it for their next book that never comes or what it is. But I'm in possession of information that I found out the same way they could have that is not being utilized in their work.
Well, maybe we could do a show on that in the future, James, about JFK, and I do want to let people know I'm going on a little sabbatical, and a delightfully Scottish friend and colleague of ours is going to sit in for me in our next show, which is about Fukushima and everything people don't know about it and should know about it. And we have guests coming that are going to be absolutely wonderful. These are tremendously informed people. They're very passionate. One of these individuals got leukemia after Fukushima. I have a family member who got leukemia after Fukushima. And these people have been following what's going on from day one. And I will provide links for Dave to put into the chat box at the end of the show so that people can get familiar with their work. One of them is a filmmaker. He produces films called On Fukushima Beach that you can find on YouTube. There are 3 of those. The other one is Kevin Blanche. And this is very, very important because we have governments that are absolutely out of control, and so the citizens are the ones that really have to begin to inform each other with proper knowledge and what's really going on. And so much of what we're going to continue to discuss in the rest of this show is basically about how you're going to live in a future where those rights and privileges and abilities are going to be taken from you by people who don't want to be outed for the horrors and atrocities they're responsible for by people like us. So it's going to be a really excellent show. And I'm really kind of jealous I won't be there because it's going to be the first time we've ever had guests on our show. It'll be our 5th show, and they're just tremendously passionate, well-informed people that are going to give you the truth about what's going on.
Yes, we have one who's agreed to be on the show. And I am advised that we will probably be able to get Kevin Blanche to call in. Kevin Blanche is one of these people. He's emphatic. He has every reason to be, but he sees the inevitability of what Fukushima is and will be. And the movies that Andrew Abasu has done, professional. I mean, they're as good as a Hollywood documentary, and he's done 3.
What I especially like about his films, especially the last one, James, is that he included something that's so important that has been so difficult for us to communicate, is that we are culpable if we don't do anything to stop it.
That's right. That's right. We get the impression that the Japanese people are out to lunch. And yet, in the first movie that he does, which is On Fukushima Beach, you have these 3 farmers standing up before these magistrates or officials who are trying to put their spin on this. Everything's all right. We've got it under control, which is a lie. And they are confronting them. What's amazing is that I know from experience, and so do you, that if you went to a city, to a mayor's meeting, or you went to anywhere here in the United States and you were too well voiced, you had too many facts, you were too penetrating, you were too dangerous. And so they had plants in the audience, or they had police all ready to get you and throw you out before you got as far as these 3 men do. And these 3 men actually lay it into these guys and call them down on it, but they do it in the polite manner. But, I mean, they are, comparatively irate. This is amazing, and people need to see it because it's a good lesson for us. It's a very good lesson for us.
It is a very good lesson, and I'm really looking forward to listening to the show, even though I'll be on sabbatical until our first show in November, because they're coming from two completely different perspectives in a sense. And Andrew Ibusu is the filmmaker who produced the films on Fukushima Beach, and he's somewhat of a reserved character, but he's very, very intelligent, very well informed, and his films are excellent. Kevin Blanch, however, is exceptionally morally outraged, and he is taking every opportunity to get people to understand what's happening, because he has suffered the ultimate price, having contracted leukemia. He's had his life stolen from him, so you can understand he's angry, but he's righteously angry. And if more people were, things would change a lot faster than they are, and we really need that. So he can be a little expressive in ways that may offend people because he enjoys his expletives, but he has every right to be angry. And I really hope his passion rubs off on people before they too suffer the same fate.
Well, he makes no idle claims. Everything that he says is well researched. He's been at this longer than anyone else. When Fukushima first became a problem, he was involved. Sadly, everything that he projected that would happen has happened. And he hasn't let the deniers and the social engineers get away with anything. When you understand that he has fought the good fight, and now he has reached a point of absolute militancy about it, which I respect. I uphold his right to be as emphatic as he wants to be. Now, it may not be my language, it may not be Crystal's, it may not be yours. But what we're looking at is someone that has been to the abyss, looked over the edge, and has come back to tell us what he saw. And it's the truth.
And he's come back to tell us what he's seen before we too have to experience it. And I would venture a guess that if other people were in his position, they would be equally morally outraged and perhaps use the same expletive as much as he does. Because, that's the thing. We want to prevent suffering. We want to prevent it. And people who have gone through it first are the best at doing that, because they can give you the play-by-play. And they don't do it because they're trying to sell something. They do it because they give a damn about you and your children and your future, and they don't want you to experience what they have experienced.
That's right. And, of course, when Andrew Ibusu makes a movie, it costs money. It costs money for the film. It costs money for the work that he puts into it. And when you see it, you see that this is Hollywood quality. So if you want to contribute to him, and, of course, if you want to contribute to Kevin Blanch, who travels, who goes to Washington, D.C., goes to New York City, that he is the best support we have for getting things done. He's an activist. In fact, he puts activism on the map.
Yes, that's right. So it will be an excellent show. We're super grateful to our Scottish comrade, Myrid, for her willingness to sit in for me, and she was the one who introduced us to both of these folks, and we're both better for it, so I really appreciate her doing that as well. We're going to go a little bit deeper into technopathy based on the social engineers and their own designs. And again, as we've explained, this is important because this is the blueprint for self-destruction. It's happened 6 times before, and we would like very much to prevent it this time, right? So we can do that if we're all informed and we're all on the same page and we all take the appropriate actions.
I think it's very important that people realize that the anomalies that exist and that are written about in books like Cremo's have information which, if you're familiar with it, advise that the histories of this earth go back much further than 6,000 years, 10,000 years, 50,000 years. And I'm talking about the human histories, and that we have legacies that we don't know about, that have been recorded and left for our edification or warning. These are suppressed, and there's more suppressed in the way of archaeology and now history than is truthfully given to us.
And because of the digital age, and the ease in which things can be rewritten. Even modern history is being rewritten very, very quickly. And that's something that we need to address as well. So, you and I did a couple of shows earlier this year. One was with Mark Snyder of Ohio Exopolitics, and we also did one with Randy Moggins of Off Planet Radio, where we did discuss a little bit about this. And again, this was pre-Snowden. So I think the other way that Snowden did us a favor is, until someone like that comes out having insider knowledge and is very, I guess we could say is accepted more publicly because they had previous knowledge, then what we have to say doesn't sound so far out, because we not only have a corroborative source, but it just helps people kind of move farther along than they ordinarily would have if it was just people in the alternative media saying it. So that's important. So I do want to go over some of the things that we've previously discussed a little bit and include them in this, because I think that now that Snowden has done what he's done, what we have to say about this will make a lot more sense and be taken far more seriously. So there is Windows 8, Internet IDs, and a disposition matrix, which we've talked about before. Windows 8 is very different for people not using it. My main computer crashed at the end of last year, and the only out-of-the-box computer I could get on short notice had Windows 8. I was having a very difficult time using it because I was trying to interact with it the way I had interacted with all of the previous Windows programs, but it's not like those programs. And the way that it's different has to do with it's cloud-based, which we'll get into in a moment. But also, it didn't just have the terms and use, the terms of use conditions that you had to sign. It also had a behavioral policy, which I thought was very strange. And when I was trying to sign up for everything and get all of the, kind of back office stuff you need to do to get it to run right done, it wasn't working, and I couldn't figure out why. And so I went to the online help desk and noticed that lots and lots of other people had the same problem, and the online help desk were responding like little information Nazis and saying, well, we just have to be sure it's you for your protection. We want to protect your data. It's for your privacy. Nothing really could be further from the truth. And of course, I've said before, the New World...
Oh, the boys up at Microshits are unhappy because we're talking about Microsoft Windows 8, which was designed by NASA. If you have Windows 8, I advise you to shit-can that computer and get another older one that you can put XP or 7. Even Vista's better than that shit. Better still go to ReactOS and download that operating system. Yes, they've cut my Skype. See, this just proves what I'm saying about Microshit being part of the Fusion Center.
All right, so we'll try that again.
Oh, hang on, let me get James back.
Oh, okay.
Don't they understand, my brothers and sisters out there, that every time they do this, it just gives more credence to what we're saying about everything being monitored?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
James, you're back.
Yes. I don't know what happened.
The boys in the Fusion Center got really upset talking about Windows 8 piece of shit.
Yeah, I thought maybe they would. Bill Gates is their fair-haired boy.
Fairy-haired boy, in my opinion.
I wish the SOB would stick to software and not try to be the poster child for all the evil of the New World Order, dispensing shots, vaccinations to African people, like he knew what he was doing.
They're killing the people over there, too.
Yes, they are. Well, that's where it started. Genocide first started there.
Well, I'm going to let you two finish your show. Take as much time as you want or you need.
Thank you very much, Dave. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
So getting back to the social engineering through the digital age and what's really going on. So they were like little information Nazis and saying, well, we're protecting you. We have to know it's you. And what people don't really understand is that what they're trying to do in Windows 8 is a precursor to this. is combine all of your online personalities. Maybe you have one for Facebook and you have one for LinkedIn and 10 different email addresses. They don't want that anymore. They want everything consolidated. And it's not for your protection. It's for your tracking. It's for their tracking.
Save Mr. Computer the bother.
You betcha. And this is what a disposition matrix is. And I want to go over this one more time very quickly. When Obama came out with his drone strike list, it was basically an assassination list. And as we explained before, when governments begin rebranding things and putting Orwellian spin on things, they're hiding things from you because they're on their way to a dictatorship and don't want you to figure it out. So obviously an assassination list in which Americans are not being given a trial first is not a good thing, and people started to figure it out. So Obama rebranded it a disposition matrix. And I want to be clear about what this is. Now, earlier we were talking about films and movies and series that really go a long way in helping to explain so many different things. And in this particular sense, a very excellent series is called Caprica, which was the precursor to Galactica. And it's on Netflix now, which is free if you're a subscriber. And it's excellent in that what happened was, this is the story of how the Cylons kind of came to be. But what happened was the online digital footprint of a human being, when put together, became their personality matrix. And it was so effective that one of the main characters who owned a technology company lost his wife and was trying to create a virtual her that he could interact with. And he was using her online footprint. He was data mining her online activity. And then he would input all of that into her personality matrix and then try to interact with her. And if she didn't respond quite the way he knew she would in real life, he would go back and try to get more data. And this eventually morphed into what became artificial intelligence. So there's a little bit of a history there that I think is very helpful in understanding where we're kind of going with this. So with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, there are 600 companies that are basically forming what I refer to as the New World Order corporate charter. They're writing the text. It's secret to everyone but them, basically, which is not a good sign. And, of course, you can be sure that Microsoft and Google and all of the big guns are involved in this. And I did forget to mention very quickly during the previous shows that we did about this, that while I was doing research trying to begin building a list of corporations that were part of this, part of that 600, I did come across a source that mentioned Procter & Gamble. And I thought that was really interesting because people are very familiar with Foster Gamble, who put out the movie Thrive. So at this point, I would say to folks, if you really believe that he's here to serve your best interests and the release of free energy and a free and open world for everyone, perhaps you can ask him, as his company is a member of the 600, what's in that text and would he please release it to us so that we can...
Don't hold your breath, Crystal.
Yeah, so, and during these previous shows that we did where we talked a little bit about this, I mentioned that the head of Google, Eric Schmidt, was coming out with a new book, and it wasn't available yet. I think it came out in April. You could pre-order it. So I hadn't read it, but what I have done is followed a bunch of the trade blogs that are involved with technology and listened to a lot of the presentations he gave, because he did do kind of a global speaking tour, not just promoting the book necessarily, but rather the ideas in the book. And one of the first things that all of these techno-gizmo people recognize is that the one thing he's not really talking about is your privacy. And the reason for that is, and of course we've mentioned this before, you can learn a lot more about people by what they don't say. That's because you're not going to have any privacy. So anybody who says that they're trying to protect you for your privacy is drinking the Kool-Aid. You're not going to have any privacy. I did finally get the book, and I did begin reading it, and these are some things that I would like to share about it in conjunction with some of the other things that are going on so that people can get a real-world picture of the future that these people are planning and who will ultimately benefit from it. There was in one of those shows that we did, I went back, over the last couple of days, I went back and looked, and I couldn't find it, but I did make reference to 3 new classes of people that Eric Schmidt had predefined in one of these lectures that he was doing, and that these new classes are based on the new digital age. And not only that, but the first thing we have to recognize is that if they're predefining 3 new classes that are going to replace what we now refer to as the poor, middle, and upper class, we immediately recognize that the technology, again, is not going to be used for the betterment of our fellow man, but rather to uphold the status quo. Because technology, if it's used rightly, should uplift our brothers and sisters, and we should be equals. In which case there would be no future in which there are 3 different classes. So that's first and foremost. I would also like to say that the reviews on the back cover of this book was written by Eric Schmidt, the boss of Google, and was co-authored by Jared Cohen, and the name of the book is The New Digital Age. The reviews on the back cover of the book, the raving reviews, are from people like Bill Clinton, Henry Kissinger, Tony Blair, and Michael Bloomberg. So that should say a lot. And basically it's very, very telling, yes. And basically what this amounts to is, and of course this will become obvious as we continue, is that we're going to play along or we're going to suffer and be labeled terrorists. That's where this goes. Now, Kissinger has publicly stated, and I've talked about this before, and a lot of people know this, but he has publicly stated, he is on record as having said, that who they refer to as terrorists are those opposed to a new world order. And people who understand this, to those folks, it's painfully obvious that this is true, because if you want a new world order, you certainly can't have the countries in the, quote, axis of evil doing their own thing, which of course is why, as Wesley Clark learned the hard way, we're going to attack 7 countries in 5 years. These are people that would not normally go along with the New World Order because they were doing their own thing. So this is where the war plans come from, is the introduction and implementation, full implementation into the New World Order. This is what Libya, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, I don't remember all of the 7 countries, but basically they're in the, quote, terrorist axis of evil, when in fact that has nothing to do with it. They are being labeled terrorists because their way of life is not conducive to the New World Order. Again, the TPP has 600 corporate advisors, which is super important. And, of course, Bill Gates is going to be part of that. And something that we talked about in other shows was it's an initiative that Bill Gates has poured some of his money into called the Better Than Cash Alliance. And this is a move to begin steering people away from using cash. And the reasons for that, again, are going to become more important and obvious as we go through this. The introduction to the book very clearly states that the Internet is the largest anarchy experiment in human history, not bound by terrestrial laws. And of course, that's a little bit of Orwellian spin, isn't it? Terrestrial is talking about government. So that's what that's about. This is a direct quote from the book. Consider what the lack of top-down control allows. The online scams, the bullying campaigns, the hate groups, websites, and terrorist chat rooms. This is the Internet, the world's largest ungoverned space. So that in itself says quite a bit, in that they fully intend to govern it, and in fact, they've already been doing it in ways that are rather sneaky that a lot of people don't know, and we'll cover that too. Well, actually, here's a really good example. A lot of people know, I guess, people that are plugged into the alternative media will recognize that a couple of months ago or so there was kind of a lot of internet chatter about how the UK government was going to clamp down the internet so that their citizens could not access what they deemed esoteric websites or knowledge. And to a lot of people that doesn't really say anything, but I want people to understand what the definition of esoteric is, so that they really are equipped to read between the lines in terms of what these people say is happening. Esoteric information is intended for or understood by only a select few. Its knowledge restricted to a small group or limited circle. So basically, when they say esoteric knowledge, what they're saying is, crap, you guys are finding out what we're up to and we're sharing it faster than we can put the kibosh on it. Because that was supposed to be reserved for our little New World Order club. So that's basically what's going on there.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, these are some points that are made, and these are really only in the first couple of chapters. I haven't been all the way through the book yet. Governments will find their newly connected populations more difficult to control. Who will be more powerful in the future, the citizen or the state? Well, they behave as though these are questions our governments haven't asked, but if that was the case, why is there already a kill switch? So that doesn't make any sense. Eric Schmidt and his co-author supposedly went to Iraq to better understand how technology could be used to rebuild a society. As explained on page 19 of the introduction, we collaborated first as writers of a memo to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton about lessons learned in Iraq, and then as friends. So I think that's also very telling, because Hillary Clinton, and of course I think people are becoming more aware of this, is being set up to become a supposedly valid presidential candidate for the 2016 election, which is really horrifying. And that these people feel like they've done a service to our country by reporting to a woman who blurted out in a congressional hearing, who cares if these people died? It was only 4 people, and this is Benghazi. Right?
The one person on the planet that they could find that would be worse than Obama.
Oh, yeah. She really is god-awful, and it was really funny. We were having a private conversation the other day, and you asked me if I knew where she came from. Do you remember my response?
Well, most people don't, but she came from a gang family. Her father took over the mob from Capone. In fact, that information has been put out by a gentleman that was one of her advisors, her and Bill Clinton's advisors, all the way from their running for the governorship of Arkansas all the way to the White House. And he let that information out, and he specifically says, well, it's a done deal for her, but let me tell you, nothing worse could happen for her to be president. And, of course, she's got more blood on her hands than people can imagine.
That's right. In fact, there are people who have written articles about the long trail of bodies of people who have been in their service, their private service, which I think also says a lot. So, I mean, that's not a good situation, clearly, and that Eric Schmidt and his co-author, Cohen, were reporting this back to Hillary Clinton, I think is very, very telling, especially since there's a YouTube video of her very clearly stating that she needs more money because they're losing the propaganda war.
Well, she proved herself worthy of the monster's sponsorship by defending the criminal element of the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers originally were very socially conscious. They were trying to achieve some semblance of equality on the street for black people. But they were infiltrated by a criminal element to make them look bad. And who does she defend? She defends the criminal element of the Black Panthers, working for an organization that, of course, was a front for the FBI. So she proved herself.
As a viable monster, yeah.
Yeah, that's before she married or got involved with Bill Clinton. Two people who could see eye to eye on every immoral ground they can be devised.
And it is interesting that she has roots in the Chicago crime syndicate because, and a lot of people don't know this.
Yes, so does Obama.
That's right. And what's so interesting about that is this is one of the 2 places in our country, the other one is Washington, D.C., with the strictest gun control laws, and Chicago has the worst crime rate because of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when the criminal knows that you can't defend yourself, that you don't have the means, they get very emboldened. It's like I mentioned about my conversation with Bobby a number of years ago. He said that London had never heard of home invasions until after they took everybody's guns. That doesn't apply to criminals, does it? And so when they know that the homeowner doesn't have any means of protecting themselves effectively from someone with a gun, they're quite brazen. And the same can be said. And this is the most violent form of crime there is, the home invasions.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, I was a member of a rifle and pistol club, and I volunteered to teach ladies gun safety and gun defense. And they would always bring their friends who didn't know for sure that you should have a gun in the house or whatever, and I would give them a lesson in reality. I would say, let's say that your husband was gone and you were alone in the house, and suddenly someone's trying to break in the front door. You're going to live a lifetime in those next minutes that you wouldn't go through if you had your hand on a gun. Because all you have to do is shoot through the door. And if you don't hit them, they'll leave. Now, I don't care what states say or what the law is or whatever in these states, but if you have a registered firearm in your house and you're a woman at home late at night and you shoot through that door, nobody in their right mind is going to do anything but no-bill you. So, whatever happens.
And of course, now this feeds very nicely into the points that are coming next, because this is again the rewriting of reality and history, because all the mass media pushes and promotes and airs is the phony baloney, black ops, psyop. Oh, look, people are coming into the malls and our universities and our middle schools and shooting all of our loved ones. That's not really happening. They're actors. And what they aren't showing you are the statistics that very clearly show how many people actually save their own lives being gun owners. And not only that, but very few people realize on purpose that historically, the historical pattern that they clearly don't want anyone talking about is that disarming the population is the precursor to genocide. It always has been.
Yes, it always has been, and would have been the case in England. Might still be the case in England once that they got the guns. But the only thing that is holding these monsters back is America, because the gun ownership here is a professed right. And so many people believe that every time they start their gun control efforts, they get beat down. Nobody will go for it. They've tried all kinds of bring your gun in and we'll give you something in return. They end up with crap. They end up with guns that won't work or whatever. So that it's never worked. And these politicians that sponsor these gun control measures, if the elections were honest, if the machines that they were using to count the votes weren't hacked, they'd never get reelected. Because Americans, by and large, they may not say it, but most Americans feel that gun ownership is the only thing that keeps an encroaching federal government at bay. They believe that. I believe that. Charlton Heston believed that. But, you can't trust the NRA anymore because they have sold out. They have bought into the big lie. So now I recommend if people want to join an association that will protect their gun rights as much as they can, it's the NAGR.
Yes, that's really important because, again, going back to social manipulation, social engineering, which is social manipulation, what they're feeding people through the media is how bad guns are for our society. And you and I pointed this out in previous shows that we did before we started this radio show, that when they tried this with Sandy Hook and all of these other things, they didn't get the response. They didn't get the pre-programmed response that they're used to from the mindless, fluoridated sheeple. What they got was a 100% increase in gun sales.
That's going on. And, I was brought up in a home where my stepfather had been in the war in the Pacific. He had been a Seabee. He was on Guadalcanal when the Japanese decided they wanted it back. There wasn't anybody but Seabees to defend it. So he had firsthand knowledge of what war was. He came back and he had jungle rot on both feet. Almost lost him. He is a hell of a man. But he didn't cotton to guns. He had seen enough killing. He'd seen enough of whatever. But we had one gun in the house, and I would go hunting with it. That was all right. And I didn't own a gun. Even after I left home, I didn't own a gun until after I had graduated from a university and had moved out in the country with my wife. I didn't even want a gun then. We lived out in the country. I didn't want a gun. And then Kent State happened. Then I bought my first rifle, which is a 30-30 bolt action, Remington. And that's the first gun I ever owned. And I bought it because of Kent State.
Well, I was absolutely delighted to discover that they didn't get the socially engineered response they were expecting. Not only did gun sales skyrocket, but so did militia membership. Some people reported 100 members a day. So people aren't quite as asleep at the wheel as they thought, and it really threw them for a loop, and I'm glad, because it's the first time in a long time that people have done what they know is right rather than what they were told, and I think that's really super important.
American militia members were very open back before 2000 because there were people like Bogarts and other people that were coming out, and they were telling us about what was intended. That they intended to implement the New World Order by the year 2000, and that they had everything prepared to do it. That's what the Y2K scare was all about. But it didn't happen, and it didn't happen because nobody fell for it. And there were all kinds of people, even some wealthy people, that were ready for that. They thought that we were going to have the same thing people are prepared for now. You know, because certain things happened, certain things were divulged, certain things came out of the woodwork. It was discouraged, and they didn't go through with it, and so their schedule was set back, and I'm sure the Satanists lost some membership there, because, you know, Satan should be more powerful than that, right?
Well, you and I both know that a lot of these people that are maybe minion Satanists, I really like that word minion, I just love it, I don't know why, are really cowards that only think about their own survival and will go along with whatever side they think is going to win. That's the side of the fence they land on. And when they realize that the people that they pledge their allegiance to may not come out on top, they did some second look. You know, they took a second look at their position and said, well, you know, maybe this isn't really where I belong. And even though those are acts of cowardice and self-preservation, it's to the benefit of our country and its citizens nonetheless, unfortunately.
Well, what amuses me is they have all these arsenals of exotic weapons, and they still have to dream up more. And, of course, it's a military-industrial potlatch, too. But they can't have enough of anything and everything. And yet, when you really figure out, I mean, they've got all the luxury and all the excesses, and they could have leisure time if they knew how to spend it. But they've got all of this, and they're going to sacrifice it for a delusion. And they're sacrificing the environment, they're sacrificing everybody else's quality of life, and they're going to catch up with that too. So, where's the wisdom?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. This is not based on wisdom. It's based on cowardice, self-preservation. And, you know, maybe at some point we can reach those people. I don't know, but there are people that we do reach and can reach, and that's why we do what we do. But as far as the guns go, everything is very specifically timed, and people have to recognize this. That's why all of these things happened when they happened. These aren't just cyclical, coincidental things. These were timed very precisely, not just for votes in Congress about banning guns, but also, as we talked about in the last show, this UN arms trade treaty that John Kerry signed. Because this, again, is social engineering and it's psychological manipulation, because the basis for this is that the arms trade is based on us useless eaters and mindless sheeple. Apparently we just have too many guns and we share them with terrorists. Never mind, our leader got caught shipping guns to Mexico, and treason is running amok because now he's arming the, quote, Syrian rebels. You know, it's absurd, and that's the thing we have to get across is this new digital age that they're outlining, and these are social engineers. I am reading you information directly out of a social engineer's book, in which clearly nothing is going to change. There will be one law for them and one law for us, and they intend to keep it that way.
Well, after they depopulated the Earth of 95% of humanity on the Earth, that's their stated goal. When people publish things to this effect, shamelessly,
arrogantly,
Yeah, and people read this stuff and they come to the obvious conclusions of what these people have in their mind to do and are undermining, you've got Obama going to military commanders and saying, will you agree to fire on American citizens? And if they say no, they lose their command. This is outrageous. Of course, I am not in the least bit worried that any military commander would feel obliged to tell the truth to a treasonous bastard.
Yes, and I don't mean to be harsh, but what you just said, when people read this stuff, they don't read this stuff. We read this stuff, and we're reporting to people who don't read it what's in it, because they have the right to know, and their survival depends on it.
That reminds me of my role at the Philadelphia Naval Hospital when I went up on the 7th floor to read to those people.
I mean, that's another...
I think they were more alert than the American public.
Well, they are, but they were also from a generation in which proper knowledge was still given out, which meant the books were actually worth reading. And this was before the digital age became so corrupt by these institutions in which they don't want people reading books. And so we'll get to that in just a moment. So I want to continue with this because we have a lot to get to. So this is also, again, I'm reading a quote from this very same book. And this is a social engineer and one of his cohorts, so this is important to pay attention to. He said, we share a worldview about the potential of technology platforms and their inherent powers, and this informs all the work we do, both within Google and without. We believe that modern technology platforms, such as Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, are even more powerful than most people realize, and our future world will be profoundly altered by their adoption and successfulness in societies everywhere. And the first thing I would like to point out about that before moving on is their use of the term adoption. Is it going to be forced, socially engineered, or will you have a choice? And as I continue, you, and by you I mean the listeners, are going to understand that you're not going to have a choice. And that's very, very important because it limits your options in ways that are not survivable if you aren't going to play ball.
Well, the American people made a choice when they refused all of these attempts at gun control. But that didn't keep Kerry from going to the UN and signing a treaty that they're going to try to work into affecting it surreptitiously.
Yes, the bad guys always tell you what they're going to do, and this particular social engineer wrote an entire book about it. I'm just providing the highlights, but at the same time, it's important that people know what they have planned so that they can stop it. And what's interesting, I want to point some things out because, again, this is the boss of Google and his co-author. That's who I just quoted in this book, The New Digital Age. And it's important before I continue to maybe take a stroll down memory lane about things that Google has done in the past. Google once said they wanted to be the information god. And this goes back to what we were discussing before, even some of the movies that we were talking about, but even Dmitry Kulesov and how they've rewritten the definition of ground zero. Because, interestingly, a lot of people don't know this, but Orwell's book 1984 was remotely deleted from thousands of Kindles after people bought it, based on the, I think, completely erroneous idea that they didn't have the copyright permission to sell it. So when you don't have the book on your shelf and it's on a cloud somewhere, you don't really own it. And it's really easy to delete and rewrite. The other interesting thing now, they're acting really innocent in that, well, governments just don't realize how much power their citizens have yet. That is complete nonsense. And I'll tell you how I know this. And I've talked about this before. And until people experience it, they really just don't get it. But I've said before many times, the first book I wrote, which again is no longer available, took me several years to write. I started really earnestly in about 2004, and I finished it in 2008. I released it in 2009. And interestingly, during that time period, I was looking at the term greenhouse gases. And when I started in 2004, because this is when the propaganda about man-made global warming came out and they kept calling it greenhouse gases. At that time, when I did a query on Google for greenhouse gases, I got hundreds of pages of companies selling carbon injection kits for greenhouses because it's plant food. It is not poison. Your plants have to have it. But eventually, by the time I finished the book, when I did a query on Google for greenhouse gases, I got Al Gore. Where did that come from? It came from Google. Google is doing this. So your, quote, information god doesn't want to offer you all the information that ever was. They want to offer you specific information, which, again, is social engineering. Just like what they're doing to the definition of ground zero with Dmitry Kulisov. There was also, and I've posted this many times on my Facebook page over the past couple of years, there was a TED Talk in which a fellow talked about his concern in that search engines were customizing our searches without our permission. And what he specifically referenced was how he discovered, it was on Facebook, he had a particular political bent. And he noticed that more and more of his feed was of a different political bent, and it was bothering him that this was happening. Where was it coming from? An opposite view was being injected constantly into his feed, even though he had no friends or people that he knew that felt that way. So it was obviously coming from somewhere else. And during this talk, he said that he discovered that 5 different people can go on Google and query the exact same thing, and they will get 5 different search results. And this goes back to your personal disposition matrix. And what I mean by that is, if your online data footprint is showing that you're picking up on things that are going to lead you to conclusions that are not beneficial to the New World Order, you're going to stop getting those results in your queries. They are not customized to help you. They are customized to hinder you. And on top of this particular fellow, this isn't exactly, I didn't have time to go back and look up the exact quote of what he said, but it was in the same talk, where he was quoting somebody involved in this who said, well, we think that maybe a squirrel in your neighborhood might be more important to you than what's going on in the Middle East. But what he made very clear is that you're not being given the ability to make that choice. The search engine is doing it for you. And when these people profess in their books with their Orwellian spin that, well, the governments haven't figured this out yet. Oh, yes, they have. They have been manipulating what is available to users on the Internet for a very, very long time. And believe me, they're not even close to being done with how far they can go with that.
Alexa, explain to people how the government and the powers that be engineer this. For instance, let's say, Crystal, that you wanted to start a search engine. You're going to have to find capital. You're going to have to buy servers. You're going to have to buy people, offer jobs and hire people. So when you start out to get a competitive search engine and put your name out there, it's going to cost you at least $2 million. I mean, that's the minimum. Where are you going to get that money? You're not going to get it because they will make sure you don't get it. They profile you. They know that you are what they call an intellectual terrorist. So they're going to make sure you don't get the money. They minimalize the opportunities of people like you and me, and they give it to people like Schmidt, who will be the proverbial butt kiss for the powers that be.
That's right, and I apologize. I skipped over this when discussing a personal disposition matrix because so many dutiful, good little citizens will tell you on camera when they're interviewed on the street, well, what do you think about all of this surveillance? And they say, well, I don't care because I don't have anything to hide. What they don't get is that isn't what this is about. You can't seriously believe that corrupt, criminal, pedophile governments are using surveillance to find criminals. They're competitors, maybe, but not criminals. This is about being able to discover and weed out who the dissenters and heretics are from the official narrative, and that's before the punishment phase begins. And there will be a punishment phase. This is setting things up for the new witch hunts and the new inquisitions. And the digital punishment is in this book. So it's not about, catching you doing something wrong, because again, you have to remember what Kissinger said, and he is one of the premier social engineers. Those who we refer to as terrorists are those who do not want to go along with the New World Order flow. That's what he's talking about. And of course, recently, it was all over the news, mainstream news, that the IRS was targeting Tea Partiers. Well, where did that come from? The Activist Post recently released an article where I think it was in Virginia. The police were using their new technopathy devices to scan license plates in a parking lot at an event where there were protesters so that they could begin building a database. What for, if they're not going to target these people? That's what it's for. That's what all of this is about. And interestingly, there was a movie I posted a couple of weeks ago on Facebook called Silent Epidemic, The Untold Story of Vaccines. And a couple of days after I posted it, people were emailing me and saying, it's been marked private and it's gone. So I went and looked again, and I found a 30-minute trailer for this film, and it's absolutely excellent. But you get about 15 minutes into the film, and there's a fellow who explains, and he says the following, that Glaxo, which is a pharmaceutical company, GlaxoSmithKline, has hired a software company to conduct online surveillance of vaccine opponents. He goes on to say that Bill Gates gave a large grant to the University of Connecticut to create an internet surveillance system, and that Google has recently been approached to censor all anti-vaccine websites. So this is where this goes. Your privacy, that ship has sailed. These people are not concerned about your privacy. They want all of your thoughts and motions and beliefs out there in the public so that they can build a disposition matrix on you to figure out whether or not you're going to be problematic when they try to institute the New World Order. That's what it's about.
Well, I think that originally was the idea they had in mind for the Internet, to be able to profile people that they would put in the class as a dissident or troublemaker or never a criminal, but what they would later on define as a subversive or whatever, somebody that didn't want to go along with their program, someone that had something to say about their freedoms and their liberties, somebody that wanted the social contract that we all have with the authorities honored, both sides of it. I mean, this makes you a cultural terrorist in their eyes, and they had hoped that they would have a way of determining this about all of us. They didn't realize that it would become an information source for people to get across their point and present what these monsters consider untenable information. And it's worked against them.
Information.
Yeah. Well, actually, the esoteric means, in non-Wikipedia terms, it means the initiate. Initiated information is reserved for the initiate. And
that's right. They just reduced that to a small group of privileged people. Yeah.
And originally it had a connotation like this is something that you need to be prepared to understand because it's out of the box. And arcane knowledge and so forth, which went beyond what public education would teach or whatever. It didn't have the connotation that it has now. What it has now is it's a vernacular form of we want to keep secrets from you because we don't want you to know how to protect your own interests.
That's right. And I think that we're at a point where both ways of defining it really have a confluence, don't they? It ends up at the same place. Yeah.
Well, they have had their secret societies and they've had their tongue-in-cheek BS, which they've sold. None of them have a spiritual side. If you think that these people have a spiritual side, then you need to understand what the word spiritual connotes. There's nothing spiritual about Satanism. There's nothing spiritual about this extrapolation they make of Lucifer being more like a Promethean figure. It is evil, and it is contextualizing themselves as deserving the power of life and death over others. That is evil, and it should not be tolerated. It should not be sublimated into anything, and anybody that builds a context for this and a collective for this needs to be brought down, and the sooner the better. And what we have is we have corporations which are organizing around such a mindset. And if we don't stop them, if we don't reverse this trend, we're going to have a planet where no one will want to live, because these are mindless, insane creations.
Self-serving, spineless creatures.
Oh, there's nothing good you can say about them, and they're not good for themselves. They haven't the wisdom or intelligence to realize the world that they're creating is not going to be one in which their children will want, that they'll want very much longer, and that they will not survive. That this compact that they have made with a system of belief that is absolutely counterproductive to everyone's survival will only lead to the destruction of everything for everyone.
Again, that's right.
And this time, this will be the last one here. And,
considering it's happened 6 times already, I don't know that I can disagree with that.
Yeah, they have left the earth. Oil extraction, the fiascos that they've created with their nuclear energy escapades, all of this has left the earth untenable for habitation, and it's beginning to show. No matter what they do from here on out, it's not going to change anything because they haven't the ability to change it for the better. All they can do is continue the downward slide, ruining the quality of life for everyone and everything they touch, including themselves.
Well, they absolutely have the ability. They just turn their back on it. They do have the
Not
ability.
anymore. Not anymore. They don't have the ability to turn it around. Because Fukushima right now, the plutonium waste that they have dumped in the Atlantic Trough, the deforestation of the Amazon basin, all of these things, you can't, for instance, you take the Gulf of Mexico. They have destroyed the coral in the Gulf of Mexico. It is the coral that provides the environment for the marine life that the fishing industry was based on. That can't be replaced for 10,000 years.
And they're not done yet. I mean, that's the thing.
We're going to see more nuclear accidents, so-called accidents. When they set off those underground detonations near the New Madrid fault zone, that should have told everyone just how bad they intend things to be.
All right, so again, remembering that I am reading to you quotes directly from a social engineer's book, which I highly recommend that you get because, as I said before, I've only been through the first couple of chapters, and even the introduction was really pretty shocking. Again, the book is called The New Digital Age. It's by Eric Schmidt and the co-author Cohen. Again, if you go to Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble and type in the title of the book, I'm sure you'll find it. This is another direct quote from the book. So again, remember I was talking about what Kissinger said, in that he is also a social engineer, and you can bet he's up to his eyeballs in this Trans-Pacific Partnership. And of course, so is Eric Schmidt and Google. And remember what he said. Those we call terrorists are those that don't want to go along with the New World Order. And this particular quote comes directly from the book and is very much in line with what Kissinger said. People from a group the government doesn't like will have their payments stopped, their access to the internet cut off, and their tweets deleted. Now, this is a term that I'm using. It's not from the book, but this is digital shunning. And it's interesting that later in the book, which I just scanned, I found an interesting phrase. And instead of Cold Wars, it's Code Wars. And that's very much what we're going to have happen. People have talked about this prophecy, the biblical prophecy, that you won't be able to buy or sell without the mark of the beast. James and I have explained repeatedly, both in articles and on shows, that these social engineers had access to records left behind by previous lineages which explained what happened, and instead of a warning guide, these people use them as a how-to guide. And this has a great deal to do with the so-called prophecies in your Bible. They are self-fulfilling prophecies, and you're supposed to believe that, oh, God is punishing us. No, the New World Order, again, has used so much of the biblical prophecy as another means of social engineering.
They think it lends them power, Crystal.
And you know what? People that don't know any better do lend them power, and that's something that we're trying to correct. So the idea that people will be unable to buy or sell is very, very simplistic. So I want to make sure that people understand what this will really equate to for the individual. You will not be able to earn a living. You will not be able to pay your bills. You will not be able to access the internet or communicate with other people that you know. That's shunning. That's what they're going to do to you. And remember, I was telling you that the disposition matrix that they're building on you, your personality profile, is the first stage before the punishment phase comes, and other people have already experienced the punishment phase with the IRS going after Tea Partiers, for example. Now, this is social and economic control or behavior. So this is forced behavioral modification by creating a system in which you will be shunned from if you don't accept the parameters of. And again, this is about your behavior. You are not going to be able to go outside of the box. And if you do, you will be punished. So we talked about Windows 8 behavioral policy. We talked about Bill Gates and his Better Than Cash Alliance. And it's interesting that this Better Than Cash Alliance, it's absurd. It's absolutely stupid. But this was pushed as the idea that the elimination of cash transactions will benefit the poor. That's how that was marketed, which is unbelievable. And then we also have the predictive programming that goes along with this, because not only did DHS seed into the collective the cash for coffee thing. Do you remember that? If somebody pays cash for coffee, they could be a terrorist. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you see, they're already demonizing people for using cash. And maybe it's a shameless plug, or maybe I'm just concerned and want people to get it. But in the book that I released in 2010, going back to James's principle of inevitability, I wrote about this and how people would be labeled terrorists for not using cash. So once you see what they're doing and you know where it goes, you know what their next steps are going to be.
Pardon me, Crystal. You meant to say, didn't you, would be demonized for using cash. You said for not using cash.
Yes, thank you for correcting me. Yes, my mouth moves faster than my brain sometimes, and I do like to be corrected, but I make those mistakes.
Mine too, my dear. Mine too.
Yes, thank you very much. That's absolutely right. And I don't know if people will remember, aside from the DHS demonization of people, the cash for coffee, there was a commercial that came out, and it showed a person, I think it was in a fast food restaurant, using cash to make a payment for his food, and everything slowed down, and everybody behind him was like, oh my God, I can't believe you're using cash. And then, because, your credit cards are faster if you just swipe them, which is so not true. It's the reverse that's true, which is really funny. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about predictive programming. They are seeding these ideas into the collective before the technology and the rules and laws come along to enforce it, so that you won't think twice about it, because you've already considered it, and not considered it in ways that are offensive to you and your freedom, because they weren't presented to you that way. And of course, there will still be one rule for them and one rule for us. And this is important because one of the things, again, that they're moving towards is that we need, not they need, but we need online IDs to prove who we are. While the government admitted their cybersecurity task force has people creating multiple online false personas, which we call trolls and shills, and we'll be using backdoors to blogs and websites to change the wording and discredit the group and or individual. And again, you have to remember that timing is everything. These things are very carefully timed. And recently, Feinstein, who is a Zionist, is trying to develop a state definition for a journalist. And there's a reason for that. Take note and read between the lines. Potential for someone to access or manipulate online identities is expected to increase due to cloud computing. Again, this comes from the book. And what I would ask all of you, supposing that you know what cloud computing is, and if you don't, I will tell you, cloud computing means you don't actually own any of your own data. It's not on your own computer. Your computer is putting it on a cloud, which multiple entities can access without your permission. And so, in the book they make it sound like, it's just too bad that there's cloud computing because it makes it easier to steal your identity. But who asked you if you wanted or would accept cloud computing? No one. They just gave it to you.
Or they are checking out what you're doing before you publish it so they can decide whether you can publish it.
That is exactly what I'm saying. You don't own your own data anymore. So basically, your computer has just become a terminal. It's not a computer anymore. All of your data belongs to them. They sift through it. They sort through it. And this will become more apparent. Now, these are talking points that are found in the book. Governments may consider it too risky for anonymous users or, quote, hidden people. Everything will be linked. Oh, yeah. Everything will be linked to an, quote, official profile requiring verification at the state level. Identity will be the most valuable commodity of the new digital future. Now, this is expected to affect what parents name their children, which would take me a half an hour to explain. Get the book. New insurance markets are expected to develop to protect against online fraud and hacking of your virtual identity. And black markets are expected to develop for real or invented identities because, believe me when I tell you, because they're telling you, you will have one identity to prove who you are, and everything that you do under that identity goes into your disposition matrix and your personality profile, and if they don't like you, you're going to have problems, and if you want to escape those problems, well, that's where the black market for a new virtual identity comes in. Yeah.
And they're selling that, too.
Yes, it's really funny. Yes, it's totally them that are going to be running the black markets, of course. But, of course, it's a terrorist, and it's not them.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Greater transparency creates a safer and freer world. And they pathetically used Julian Assange as the poster child for this, which is a very interesting manipulation tactic, because everything you do must be made public because the world will be freer and safer, but it's okay for them to have a cybersecurity force making up phony identities to destroy you online. That's okay. So again, you have one rule for them, one rule for us, status quo.
And to negotiate all these agreements on all of this sort of crap in secret.
Oh, yeah. I didn't get too deep into that when we discussed the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but people that go to, I think it's exposethetpp.org, will find a plethora of information about this, especially in terms of the online, quote, privacy. There's nothing about privacy, but that's what they call it. And the copyright laws that are just going to destroy the Internet as we know it because it's too effective at us looking at esoteric material. You can't have that. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is another direct quote. Within search results, information tied to verified online profiles will be ranked higher than content without it, resulting in most users clicking on top verified results. The true cost of remaining anonymous, then, might be irrelevance because the content won't be seen because of its excessively low ranking. Now, this is interesting because people familiar with this will realize that about a year ago, Google was already talking about how they were re-engineering the way their search engine works to put mom-and-pop shops at the very bottom, which goes back to the corporate wars. You know, it's funny, you were talking earlier about the corporate wars in movies, and really what this will amount to for us in our day and age in reality is, yeah, they will be corporate wars, but really you're talking about somebody like Microsoft versus some guy in his garage who has a brand new software platform that's 1,000 times better. It will never see the light of day because their search engine will never let you see it. Even if you know the name of it, they will wipe it. And this goes back to rewriting history and reality. So mom and pop shops are not going to get the same kind of exposure on Google that the big companies will, and I would imagine these are the same 600 companies negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, of course. So cloud computing and the inability to delete data. So you cannot delete your history. And this, again, is a quote from the book.
But they can.
Oh, of course they can. Yeah, they can delete whenever they want or rewrite it and rebrand it, but you can't because you won't have that control. Near-permanent data storage will have a big impact on how citizens operate in virtual space. There will be a record of all activity and associations online, and everything added to the Internet, meaning Facebook, Google, your New York Times subscription, will become a repository for permanent information. This will be the first generation of humans to have an indelible record. Now, earlier in the show, we mentioned that we were going to talk about several different things, and one of them was behavioral cycles. And after what I just read about the first generation that's being socially engineered to accept this, there are two individuals, and I don't remember their names, and I apologize, but if you go to YouTube and you type in the fourth turning, you'll find two individuals who are supposedly basically just sociologists that passively observe cycles and report on how each generation is different. They even named some of these generations. So you had the baby boomers, and then you had Generation X, and now you have the millennials. And they present it innocently as though these are just natural social cycles based on natural development. That's a lie. This is all socially engineered. You can't tell me that it's a coincidence that the millennials, who are our children now, are dependent on this technology, and that it wasn't socially engineered to be that way. It absolutely was. There are no coincidences when you're talking about social engineering. It just doesn't happen. So that's really important. Okay, the authors do admit, however, that this technology empowers oppressive governments to better attack and control citizens, and explains the most important form of data collection for an autocrat. Again, that's a word people will think is innocuous. It really means dictator, is biometric data. That's your DNA, your fingerprint, and your photo. And of course, this is why Facebook got caught and had to later admit that every photo you have ever uploaded to your Facebook page is now in a database that was created using facial recognition software. Did they ask for your permission? No.
You know, the harm in this, the greatest harm, is that if we still do have any kind of thing akin to a court system where we are judged of criminal charges by our peers, they can come in and they can say, well, we have this information, you know that it's reliable and you know that it's exact, and we can prove that he did this or she did that. And that'll be case closed. Open and shut case, right? And you won't have a say, you won't have any kind of rights or whatever, because they have determined all this extraneously, and they've got the proof right here. We've kept all these records and so forth, and they can frame you, they can use anything. You know, we already know that our justice system has problems. We already know that there are loopholes for the rich, but not for us. We already know all this. So you want to entrust this kind of power to monsters? No, I don't think so.
No, and it's very much like that saying, you show me the person and I'll show you the crime.
That's right.
That's right.
Well, it begins by stealing your identity legally. And that's what they're doing. They're stealing your identity because they're stealing your persona, and they can wrap and make anything out of it and package you as a terrorist or whatever. When you are a double amputee at home and you can't get out, you can't buy flour, much less gunpowder.
Well, here's what's really interesting about that is, you know, Schmidt in his talks when he was trying to sell, you know, the designs of the New World Order, which are, of course, built into the material in the book, talked about virtual online kidnappings and how people will hold your virtual online profile for ransom. But if people were paying attention when I read what was in his book, who are the first people that are going to hold your profile ransom?
It wouldn't be possible without their complicity. When you find out that the NSA is surveilling every form of electronic media, you're going to tell me they don't know who the thieves, the cons running these romance scams and these con jobs on the internet, they don't know who they are and they couldn't arrest them? They are them.
That's right. And remember the quote that I read from him. People from a group the government doesn't like will have their payments stopped, their access to the internet cut off, and their tweets deleted. So who do you think will be the first one to hold your virtual online profile for ransom? It's not going to be some terrorist. It's going to be the government when you don't go along to get along. And that's what all of this is about. So this is really, really important that people get what's happening. And the final point that I wanted to make before we move on to transhumanism is remembering that they said very specifically, and this is very important, that the most important data collection for an autocrat, which is a dictator, is biometric data. This is your DNA, your fingerprints, and your photos. He then goes on in the book to refer to India's current, not projected, current UID program, which is a unique ID program, as the largest biometric identification undertaking in the world. Now, you tell me that Obamacare isn't a covert way of doing the same thing.
Of course it is.
Of course it is.
There is nothing in Obamacare to, in any way, facilitate better medical care or the concerns or interests of the common man whatsoever. There are people that can't afford it, that could afford at least a modicum of care without it. Besides, it also takes away a physician's right to negotiate a special situation, charity or a contribution by helping a patient on his own. And doctors do that. There are doctors that do that. But they won't be able to do it under Obamacare.
That's right, and you and I have talked about this in previous shows before we had our own show, in that Obamacare, look, people have talked about this. The social engineers have talked about this. They always tell you what you're going to do. And Bill Gates is exceptionally arrogant and has a big mouth, just like Kissinger. And he said, he is on record as saying, we have to destroy the middle class because do we want to give Granny 4 more years of life, or do we want to hire 10 new teachers? They're destroying the middle class on purpose, and Obamacare is part of that. And what will happen is you will be too poor to eat good, decent food. And then your online footprint will show them that you're eating crap, and your insurance rates will go up because of it.
There is no way that this is going to be a benefit to anyone but those at the very top. That there is no way. It is orchestrated to be that way, and it will be a vehicle for them to use later on for their 95% depopulation.
That's right. And again, you know, the first book I wrote a great deal about data mining and disposition matrices and what all this is about. And remember the time frame. This was 2004 to 2008. And within that time frame, I had met with an individual who again works alongside social engineers who told me point blank, any of her, quote, sin products, tobacco, alcohol, always cash, because they were already tracking our purchases. Now, of course, people knew that corporations were tracking our purchases to see whether or not their commercials were effective. Were they effective at emotionally manipulating us so that they could get deeper into our pockets? But now we have a fascist situation in which there is no distinction between the corporations and the government. And believe me when I tell you that everything you do is going to be used against you so that you will go with the flow, and that's the whole point. They don't want you using cash because it's off the grid and they can't track it, and they need to. And that's why, as he stated in the book, you will be shunned from this system once it's fully up and running, and you will not be able to survive if you don't use it.
Well, the biometrics are going to involve more than that, though. They will keep developing the behavioral aspect of them until it won't be you anymore. Once that they put the thing inside you, it won't be you anymore.
You know, that's very true, and there are so many interesting things about Obamacare that we've brought up before that I don't think people took seriously, but now that they're trying to sign up for it, it's really painfully obvious. Everything that you're doing is being tracked. Everything. And it's designed to be used against you. And there are people who have, and these are social engineers, when I say people, that's what I'm talking about in this context, who have written material about how they could reduce the population if they paid people not to have children. So imagine if you're on the verge of being plunged into poverty and punished if you don't get Obamacare, and they say, well, but we'll give you a really big discount if you promise not to have children. Oh, well then I'll take it. But then you're going to have to go and get sterilized, and they'll have a medical record of whether or not you did it based on your biometrics. And let's talk about vaccines. Will you be fined if you don't go get the vaccine?
Or worse.
And if you get the vaccine, which we know are being tailored to specific types of people, when this information is collected, when this data is mined, they will have a better understanding of how well their depopulation tools are working. They will have access to your medical data.
Well, we're talking about something worse than what the patricians did to the plebeians of Rome. Much worse.
Look, it's a god-awful situation. This is what they have planned. We aren't there yet. And, of course, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the deadline for that came and went, but you can bet your bottom dollar that they're working really, really hard to get it done. People need to get involved and stop it. It's been stopped before. But I did also, James, want to give you the opportunity to talk about transhumanism, because I think I saved it for the end, because I want people to very heavily consider everything we've said and then ask themselves, where transhumanism is concerned, do you really believe they're going to augment you to make you a better human being or a better slave?
There's never been a doubt in my mind that independent thought has been their greatest enemy.
Absolutely. They've admitted it as much.
Yeah, back in the 60s when they were experimenting with the mind, they had two frontiers they were exploring. One was dumbing people down. The other one was they were exploring expanded consciousness and mental prowess. And so they discovered that there were solutions, that there were hormone derivatives that could increase intelligence, that could bring a person back from massive brain damage and permit them to function at a higher level of consciousness and intellect than they had before their brain was damaged. They found all these things out, and they went into the acceleration of mental activity, and they found out that they couldn't deal with people that they had success on, that these people were able to cope better, that they were more independent than ever. And so that went in the trash can very quickly.
And would likely eventually turn on them.
Could turn on them in amazing ways.
Yes.
Because the split consciousness has capabilities, if it's organized, that are unique. The intensity and the power of the split consciousness, once that it's organized, once that it's no longer a house divided against itself, has capabilities that off-Earth intelligence fears. But they knew that, and so they decided, well, we can't have that. And they went the other way, and they started working on LSD that would cause massive brain damage. And the government produced what they call Blue Dot. And I remember back, I was going to school at the time, I walked many people that were on a bad trip around the block, as many times as it took to get them off that bad trip. Timothy Leary was a salesman of that. He was CIA, and that's admitted. So what you had was the government reversing all its programs to do damage to the individual, and that's what came out of it. There were a number of programs where they were going into universities and they were removing people because they were too good at what they did. It started at Berkeley. Berkeley was the first university to actually throw students out for being revisionists, historical revisionists.
You know, and I just want to interject very quickly that we see this now because if a police officer applicant has too high of an IQ, they are refused.
They are refused. It happened in the job market 20 years ago or more when they started telling people that were trying to get a job that they were overqualified for that job. Now, what sense does that make? I mean, why would an order filler that could do a crossword puzzle very quickly, why would he be refused a job if he needed it? That is intellectual discrimination, and it's just as bad as any other kind.
You know, it is. I've been through that myself. I've even taken personality tests. And
Why would I not know that, Crystal?
I found that the reason they were dubbing me overqualified had to do with the pay. And it's just like they say. Look, they have admitted they don't want any more intellectuals. They want people just smart enough to push the buttons. That's what they want.
Well, your powerful mind is something else. And, I'm very impressed with how you prepare for these interviews. You did due diligence and then some, my dear.
Well, it's important to me that I dig up the sources. I've tried to explain this before, and it's very odd, and I don't talk about it much, but I learned a great deal, which we've talked about before. I received extra knowledge through my dreams, and not just through my dreams, but primarily through my dreams. So I knew exactly what to look for in terms of the principle. But the details are so often irrelevant because they change constantly. So when we do shows like this, I may not remember the details of what we talked about a month ago to prove out the principle. I will go and dig up details that are relevant today that people can remember to teach them the principle today. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, because things are changing so fast that what was relevant a month ago may not be today. Or rather, there are things that are more relevant. And so we pass that and we move on because things are changing that fast. There are certain things that shouldn't change. When Obama came in office, he says, I will bring you change. Yeah, he brought us change for the worse.
We got change all right.
Yeah, we got change. We got shortchanged. But like I said, he's not the worst critter on the horizon, because Hillary Clinton can do a job on us that we would, I never thought I would ever see a female Caligula. But after Dick Morris said what he did about how Janet Reno stayed through that second term because she had some dirt on what happened in Waco, the word is that dirt is that Hillary Clinton just got tired and impatient and said, do it.
Yeah, just kill them all. I mean, she laughed. She laughed her squirrely little laugh about Gaddafi being butchered in the street on public television. I don't see how that was funny.
No. There's one thing I wish our military had, and that is, if you don't respect your enemy, he will always remain your enemy. But if you respect your enemy, if you don't kill in cold blood, like we saw those monsters in South Vietnam do, if you don't kill in cold blood, they don't do it to you.
Well, I don't know how much honor is left along those lines these days.
None.
Yeah.
None.
And it's funny, I never did get to say, because you had asked me on a private conversation with another friend of ours if I knew where Hillary Clinton came from. And that was your way of getting ready to tell me that, it was part of the Chicago Mafia. But do you remember my answer? A pod?
Yes, I do. And that, or a snake's egg. But I have never seen a more cold-blooded person in my life than Hillary Clinton.
And for those listening, again, take note. They always tell you what they're going to do before they do it. If you monitor, you data mine their own work. You look for the patterns in the media, in the marketing, in their own books. They're telling you what they're going to do, and they are telling you that Hillary Clinton is going to be your president in 2016 if you're paying attention.
Yeah. Even the people that don't like her at all and say that she'd be the worst thing that could happen to this country, she would take all of the harm that Obama has done and Bush has done before that, and all the way back, the last good president we had, they murdered. She would take all of that and she would do things that you can't imagine. You couldn't imagine after Bush left that Obama would get away with what he did, the hit lists, the killer drones, being able to take the Patriot Act and Homeland Security and make a Gestapo out of it. That's what he's done. And you wouldn't imagine that that could be done. You wouldn't imagine that George Bush could have done that, and he couldn't have done it. But a Democrat can come in and take that crap and run with it and go so much further than a Republican. Now, there are ways, there are harms that a Republican further than a Democrat can. So they play one off against each other, but they're all trending towards the same thing, and that is a police state.
Yes, it's worse than a police state, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, and if I didn't, I apologize because I meant to, but Henry Kissinger is also on record as having said publicly that during the transition into the New World Order, a lot of people will die, but it will be a better world for the people that are left. You don't need to read too much into that, do you?
No, I mean, if people would just realize that when they come out and they say things like this, of course they're aware that this is going to be publicized, so their real meanings that they have are understated. So you can imagine what they really think, what they really intend.
That's right. They don't deny it, they say it flat out.
No, because they think they have it in the bag. All monsters do. All monsters cannot imagine anything being better than them. They are on the face of the earth to show everyone else how much more they are than the regular guy, how much more they deserve, that they should have the power of life and death over you because you don't amount to what they do.
That's right, and I do want to go back to what we talked about a little bit earlier. There was a series I recommended on Netflix called Strangers, and how these people really believe that free will doesn't exist. And this is something that I've talked about for years, in that a great deal goes into the mix that is us. You know, there are the parents that we're born into, the social circumstances that we're born into, there's our name, there's the cycles of the heavens, which is our astrological sign. But we have a choice in how we use what was provided to us. And what I was talking about earlier about these two sociologists and the fourth turning and how they just act like this all magically happened. No, it didn't. It's socially engineered. And you really have to know your enemy in this regard so that you can know whether or not your mind is theirs or your mind is yours. And as an example of this, I personally have the exact same birth date as Hillary Clinton and Bill Gates. I am not like them. I have a choice. Everyone has a choice. We all have a choice. You are not a victim of your circumstances or your astrological sign or your pedigree. We all are sentient beings who have a choice, and you really need to work hard to not let other people rob you of your choice and make sure that your choices are really your own and serve you.
When you come across anything like these two sociologists you're talking about, the only thing you can take, if you're clear thinking, the only thing that you can take from it is that sociology has whored out as badly as psychology.
Even worse, well, they're interesting bedfellows, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, they are. You know, you can't make money in psychology if you can't go in and work for an employer and convince all the employees who come in with the grievance that they have a personal problem.
Yeah, I mean, you know, too many people reduce their sentient wonder to someone else is making the choice. The universe is making the choice. God is making the choice. The choice is yours, and what James and I are working so hard to do is give you what you need to make the right choice, and that you and you alone are responsible for the choice that you make, and that it's time that you make one. You really have to make one, because not making a choice is consent. Silence is consent.
I think that one of the interesting contradictions that has come out in the last few years is these physicists that are in subatomic particles, that suddenly, after they have determined for us, you know, most of them, that there is no God, that there is no design, that everything's happenstance, it's, you know, the universe throws things up in the air and in whatever way it comes down it is, are suddenly trying to find the God particle, right? I mean, or is that their way of telling us that we have found God and he's nothing but a particle?
You know what? I'll tell you what I really believe. I think that all of this that they do is their way of trying to convince themselves.
I think you're right, because they certainly haven't come up with anything that has advanced mankind one whit.
No, and they won't.
No, they won't, because, you know, who do they work for? If you have a genius, he's going to be a big threat to them. They're going to do everything they can to destroy him. Look what they did to Nikola Tesla. And that was back before the wheels really got ground down to do a crunch number on anybody that's an independent thinker. Tesla knew what electricity was. And that knowledge carried him so far beyond these dopes who still talk about electricity as being electron flow. It ain't electron flow. It couldn't be broadcasted. There. I said it. I've said the magic. Is that so amazing? Is that so amazing?
For a lot of people it is, and you and I talked privately about maybe trying to get Karen Hughes, the World Bank whistleblower, on a future show. And I like her because not only has she stated publicly and on the record that she understands our behavior is the path to self-destruction, but she also very publicly stated, and therefore obviously understands, that the American people are good people. They don't have the tools they need to do what they need to do in terms of what's in their own best interest, which is what I've been saying for a long time. I just phrase it as people are participating in their own demise out of ignorance. But at the end of the day, it's the same thing. And it's important that people recognize that. So the dumbing down is essential. It's essential to the New World Order because people are going to go with what they're told by the guy in the fancy suit on the television because that's what he said and that's what everybody else does until everybody else doesn't do it anymore because they know better.
I think that if we were going to have a message, it would be this. People of the world, not just of America, not just of England, France, or other countries, but the world. People of the world, you have bit the bullet way, way too much. It is time to bite the people that want you to bite the bullet.
It's time for you to take control of your own future because if you don't, you won't have one.
But I like the idea of biting them. I just want to sink my teeth in them. I really do.
But aside from that, James, is there anything else you would like to add about transhumanism before we wrap it up for the night?
I would just like to say that the earthbound human is a wonderful manifestation of potential. They don't need enhancement. All they need is the freedom in knowledge that it takes to grow. And then they can grow straight and beautifully and flower. And I have every faith that that's a possibility. And I don't want anything stuck in your head. I don't want anything stuck in your body. I want you left alone to your best devices because you're sound, good, and if left to your own devices, very, very creative, beautifully creative.
I agree wholeheartedly. If people were left to their own devices, the world would transform overnight. And I solely exist at this point to see that happen.
Yes.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I want to thank Dave for letting us go over. There's so much more we could have said, but, at the same time, people need to do their own due diligence. And like I said, go get the book. It's all in there. And I only covered the first 2 chapters in the introduction. But this is a social engineer telling you exactly what they have planned for you. So if you want to know where your efforts are best applied to have the kind of future you want, you need to know what they're planning and find a way to circumvent it. That's important.
See it for yourself. Don't take our word for it.
That's right. Because we do make mistakes sometimes. We try not to, but it happens. And that, we all do. And we just learn from it and grow and move on. And that's the way it is.
Well, Dave, thank you very much. We will see you in 2 weeks and we'll have a new face or two.
I want to thank you again, Dave, for how quickly you post these shows to your own website, and again for letting some of our colleagues post the entirety of these shows for free on YouTube. That's very gracious, and I appreciate it.
Yes.
All right, good night, you guys. It's been a pleasure. And the October 25th show with Myrid and those wonderful individuals about Fukushima, it's a don't-miss show. So I hope everyone will be there. Good night, you guys.
Good night.
Good night.
You're listening to Wolf Spirit Radio.